The auction yard stank of sunburned sweat and desperation. Flies hovered over bruised skin, and eyes, the ones that hadn't yet gone dead, shifted like cornered animals. She stood at the far end of the platform, barefoot, thin, with a pale cotton dress clinging to her like it had been wet once and never dried right. They didn't even pretend it was a wedding. "Fifth one this hour," someone muttered. "Half-starved thing." She didn't look up, didn't flinch when the man pulled her forward by the elbow. Her hands hung limp at her sides, wrists thin as broom handles. There was a scab on her lower lip, dried mud on her knees. Her eyes, gray, unreadable, looked past the crowd, past the desert dust, as if her soul had gone somewhere quieter and hadn't returned. Bidding started at $1. Most men chuckled. A few jeered. One tossed a coin and walked away. That's when he stepped forward. He hadn't come to buy anything. He hadn't planned to speak at all. But something about the way she stood, like she didn't even bother to hope, made him feel something shift, almost uncomfortably in his chest. He raised a hand. "3," he said. Just that. A number and nothing more. The auctioneer blinked. "Sold!" No one applauded. No one cheered. Just the creak of dust under boots as the crowd scattered. She didn't look at him as he approached. Didn't ask where they were going. When he handed her a blanket from his saddlebag, she took it without a word and wrapped it around her shoulders like it was the first soft thing she'd touched in years. They rode out of town in silence. At one point, she coughed. He offered water. She drank with small, careful sips, like she didn't believe it wouldn't be taken away. By dusk, they reached his cabin, a modest thing, tucked against the edge of a low hill. Chickens. He didn't tell her what room was hers, just lit a la she. No one had ever fed her without asking some. That night she didn't eat, but she sat beside the she, woke with the first bird call. Not because anyone called her, just out of habit. The kind of habit that comes from years of knowing bad things happen if you're not already standing when footsteps arrive. But no one came. The cabin was quiet. Dust drifted in the soft shaft of morning light through a warped window pane. She sat up on the cot. Clean sheets, thin but folded, a patchwork quilt tucked in too neatly to be just for show. Someone had tried to make the space livable. She didn't know what to do with that. Her shoes were still by the door. She hadn't worn them in days. Outside, a breeze moved gently through the weeds. The air smelled like dirt and sun, and something faintly sweet. Wildflowers, maybe. She didn't remember their names anymore. She crept to the window and peeked out. The man, her husband, though no words had confirmed it, was by the fence fixing a loose board. His hat was pulled low. He moved with quiet precision, not in a hurry, not lazy either. Just steady. He didn't look toward the house. She stepped back quickly, just in case. There was bread on the table again, fresh, warm, an egg peeled this time, salt in a little dish. She stared at it too long. Her stomach hurt from not eating, but the fear of what came after being fed, the price, the demand, the punishment if she didn't say thank you right, was stronger. But still, the egg smelled right. She sat, slow and unsure, touched the crust, broke it, ate the smallest bite. Nothing happened. No footsteps behind her, no voice demanding payment, just the ticking of an old clock on the wall and the soft creak of the porch boards when he returned. He didn't come inside, just leaned something, firewood, against the door, then walked off again. That night she waited. When the lamp was lit again, she sat by it. He came in, quiet, dusty from work, took off his coat, washed his hands in the basin, said nothing. She watched him from the edge of the room. He glanced at her once. Not sharp, not demanding, just enough to see she was still there. Then he sat in a chair near the fire, pulled out a book, and started to read. Not aloud, just silently, to himself. She kept waiting for the catch, for the change. But all he did was turn a page, and when the lamp flickered low, he got up, turned it off, and left her alone again, in a house where no one yelled. By the third day, she'd learned his rhythms. He rose before the sun. She heard the barn door creak open, the scrape of a bucket on wood, the quiet cluck of hens. He didn't slam doors, didn't raise his voice. His whole life moved like water, steady, contained. She didn't know how to be still in a house like that, so she began to sweep. Not because he asked, just because the stillness started pressing on her chest like a weight. She needed something to do with her hands. There was a broom in the corner. She moved it carefully, learning where the floor creaked, where the dust gathered. The boards whispered under her bare feet. Her hands remembered work, even if her body ached in quiet ways she didn't mention. He came in while she was sweeping, stopped in the doorway, watched. She flinched, a sharp, automatic motion, and dropped the broom. He didn't move, just blinked once, then walked past her to the sink, poured water into a tin cup, and drank. Then before leaving again, he picked the broom up, gently, and leaned it back where it had been. Didn't say a word. She didn't touch it again that day. That evening, he came in with a fresh bundle of firewood and paused beside the table. Set something down. Bread. A folded cloth with something wrapped inside. She waited until he left. Unwrapped the bundle. Inside a soft long-sleeve blouse. Old but clean. Mended at the cuffs. Someone had taken care to keep it whole. She held it to her face and breathed in the faint scent of soap. Her eyes burned. Not from dust. Not from smoke. Something else. She didn't cry. Couldn't. The tears had dried up years ago. But she sat with that shirt for a long time. Longer than she realized. Until the lamp burned low and the stars pressed against the window like distant witnesses. The next morning she wore it. And for the first time, when he passed her on the porch, he gave a small, almost invisible nod. Not approval, just that he saw her. And maybe that was enough. She started sitting outside. Not far, just on the top step of the porch, where the sun touched the wood in the mornings and warmed her knees. The cabin didn't feel dangerous anymore, but it still felt unfamiliar, like a coat that didn't belong to her yet. She watched him tend the animals. He never rushed them. Even the skittish mare, the one with a notch in her ear, came close when he offered her oats by hand. His movements were always careful, like he didn't want to scare anything that had already been scared too much. He didn't speak to her, but when he saw her sitting there the third morning, he brought out a second chair, set it beside hers, not touching, not crowding, just there. Then he sat down with his coffee, tipped his hat back, and stared at the land. They didn't speak, but silence like that felt different, not hollow, not sharp. It was almost gentle. Later that day, she found herself in the garden. It was overgrown, wild with weeds, but something about the broken rows of sprouting things pulled at her. She knelt in the dirt and began pulling them, one by one. Her hands remembered this too. How to feel for roots. How to leave the green shoots untouched. How to lose herself in a task that didn't ask for anything but patience. He came by just once, didn't say a word, left a tin pail of water near her elbow and walked away. That small act, not helping, not hovering, just noticing, made her chest ache in a way that frightened her. That evening, when she returned to the porch, the chair was there again, waiting. She sat. He joined her. Same quiet posture, same space between. The sky was turning gold. She found herself breathing deeper, steadier. For the first time in years, no one was watching her for a mistake, and she didn't feel like she had to apologize just for existing. It started with the dust. There was a corner of the cabin she hadn't dared to touch, a sheet-draped shape tucked behind the stove, forgotten beneath years of quiet. One afternoon, alone while he was in town, she pulled back the cloth. A piano. Weathered, dry, some keys yellowed, one chipped. The wood held a faint scent of smoke and time. She ran her hand across it, not to play, just to feel. But her fingers itched. They hadn't in years. She sat, slow and wary, and pressed a single note. It cracked in the silence. Hesitant, thin, but not broken. Her body stiffened. She waited for the slam of a door, for a boot step, for a voice full of scorn. None came. Just birds outside. A horse shifting in its stall. The breeze. So she pressed another key, then another. Her hands moved without permission, not gracefully, not like before, but with memory. A lullaby she once played for her sister, a fragment of something tender. half forgotten. She didn't hear him come in, only noticed when the light shifted, the faint weight of his presence behind her. She froze, but he didn't speak, didn't come closer, just stood there a while, then turned and walked back out, boots soft on the floor. She didn't know what that meant, but her hands kept playing, even after the tears came, slow and soundless, dripping onto the worn keys. Days folded into each other like the pages of an old book, each one marked by small moments that felt bigger than they should. She was learning the rhythms of the land, how the wind shifted before rain, how the horses moved when they sensed danger, how the sun touched the fields at dusk. He watched her from a distance, never intruding, but always near enough to catch her when she faltered. One afternoon, she found herself sitting on the porch steps, the worn wood rough beneath her fingers. Her hands trembled slightly, a reminder of the storms inside her she hadn't spoken aloud. He came out with a worn leather satchel. Without a word, he set it down beside her. Inside, a small bundle of papers, folded carefully. She unfolded one, revealing a faded photograph of a young girl with a shy smile. The kind of smile she hadn't seen on herself in years. He didn't explain, didn't ask questions. He just sat quietly, waiting. And for the first time, she let the silence between them speak. It happened in the kitchen. She was trying to boil water over the old stove, but the flames sputtered and went out. Frustrated, she knocked the pot. It clanged loudly, echoing in the quiet cabin. He looked up from the doorway, a rare flicker of amusement in his eyes. Without a word, he took the pot gently, fixed the flame, and handed it back. She glanced at him, lips twitching. Then, unexpectedly, a small laugh slipped out. It surprised her. The sound was foreign but not unwelcome. He nodded once, satisfied. No need for words. Just that simple moment, fragile and new. One late afternoon, the mail finally arrived. She held the envelope in trembling hands. Letters were rare, but this one felt heavier than the rest. She wanted to open it, but the memories made her hesitate. He noticed but said nothing. Instead, he sat beside her, silent support in the dimming light. After a long pause, she broke the seal. Inside was a letter from a woman, a distant relative offering help, a promise of a new beginning. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't cry. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and looked at him. No words were needed. In that quiet moment, hope flickered like the dying sun. That night was different. For the first time in years, she lay in bed without the familiar tightness clutching her chest. No nightmares chased her, no shadows lurking in corners. He'd left the door ajar, a small gesture, but one she noticed. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees. She breathed deeply, letting the silence cradle her. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. She woke feeling fragile, yet something inside her had shifted. Maybe she was beginning to believe she was safe. He never said much. His eyes held stories he didn't speak aloud. One evening, as the fire crackled low, she noticed a small, worn leather band on his wrist. He caught her looking and slowly lifted his hand, showing a faint scar beneath the leather. No explanation came. Instead, he reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand in his. His touch was soft but steady, a silent promise. She squeezed back, unsure what she was feeling. Trust? Hope? Something fragile but new. The room was quiet, but the moment spoke louder than words. Spring crept into the valley like a slow, whispered secret. The frost had finally loosened its grip on the earth, leaving the soil soft and damp, rich with promise. Early morning light spilled over the horizon in pale golds and pinks, touching the wild grasses and wildflowers that bent gently in the breeze. She found herself drawn outside more often, drawn by something she hadn't felt in years, a fragile hope. The little patch of earth near the cabin was rough and overgrown, but to her it felt like a blank page, waiting for something new. She knelt in the dirt, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed seeds into the soil. Each seed was small, fragile, a quiet rebellion against everything she'd lost. She worked slowly, methodical, the damp earth cool and rough beneath her nails. The scent of fresh soil and blooming grass filled the air, grounding her. He watched her from a distance, leaning against the porch railing with his arms crossed, the late sun casting shadows across his weathered face. He didn't say a word, but the steady rhythm of his gaze was enough. Sometimes he stepped closer, offering a gentle touch to steady her, or handing her a small tool with a silent nod. His hands were large and calloused, the contrast to her delicate fingers stark, but when their skin brushed, it sent a quiet spark up her arm. One afternoon, as the sun sank lower and the sky burned with oranges and purples, he brought out a small, worn watering can. The metal was dented, its paint chipped, but it was filled with clear water that caught the fading light like tiny stars. She looked up at him, surprised. He offered a faint, almost shy smile, and wordlessly, they began watering the tiny green shoots breaking through the soil. Their hands met briefly over the spout, fingers entwining for a heartbeat before she pulled hers back. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged with something new, fragile. As twilight deepened, the air grew cooler, and the first crickets began their song. She felt something stir inside her, a warmth that wasn't just from the sun's last rays. The garden wasn't the only thing growing. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, something good could take root here. That night, the sky darkened heavy and low. A storm was coming, rolling in over the distant hills with deep rumbles that vibrated through the ground. Inside the cabin, the warm glow of the fire flickered against the wooden walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. She sat close to the hearth, the familiar warmth seeping into her chilled bones, but her thoughts were restless, like the gathering storm outside. He entered quietly, shedding his dust-covered coat and setting it aside with careful precision. He didn't speak, but the weight of his presence filled the small room. He moved toward her, sitting close enough that she could feel the steady heat radiating from him. The storm broke then, a sudden crash of thunder, rain hammering against the roof in a relentless rhythm. The windows rattled and the wind howled through the cracks. She tensed, a reflex born from years of fear, but his hand found hers. His grip was firm and unwavering, grounding her amid the chaos. Slowly, she let herself lean into that touch, the safety in his silent strength like a harbor in the storm. Their eyes met, and in that quiet exchange was a world of unspoken words, of pain, of healing, of tentative trust. The fire crackled, a soft soundtrack to the storm raging outside and the storm of emotions swirling within her. In that small room, with thunder shaking the walls, something powerful began to bloom. Not with words or promises, but with a silent, fierce passion. The kind that doesn't roar, but grows steady, like the roots of a tree weathering the fiercest storm. She squeezed his hand, her breath catching. For the first time, she didn't have to fight alone. The morning after the storm was calm but heavy, the air thick with the scent of wet pine and earth, fresh and alive. Sunlight filtered softly through the thin mist that clung to the valley, painting everything in muted shades of green and gray. She stood by the window, fingers tracing the cool glass, watching the world slowly wake up after the night's fury. The garden outside looked refreshed, leaves sparkling with droplets, but inside her, something was shifting, an unfamiliar openness she barely dared to acknowledge. He entered quietly, boots muffled on the wooden floor. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence between them filled with unspoken truths. She took a hesitant step forward. His eyes softened as he reached out, not to grab or pull, but to offer a gentle touch on her arm. The contact was feather-light, almost shy. Her breath caught. It was the first time she let herself lean into someone, to feel safe without armor. She swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing down, but this time it didn't crush her. Slowly she lowered her guard, letting the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crumble. Not all at once, but piece by piece, brick by brick. He didn't rush her. He simply stayed, a steady presence in the quiet morning light. And for the first time, she imagined a future where she could belong. Evenings had begun to carry a different weight, softer, almost tender. The sun dipped low, setting the sky aflame with streaks of orange and deep violet, shadows stretching long across the land. They found themselves together on the porch, the silence between them no longer heavy but comfortable, like the pause between heartbeats. She noticed the way his eyes caught the fading light, revealing a depth she'd never dared to explore. Without a word, he reached out, taking her hand gently. Her skin tingled where their fingers touched, a quiet fire awakening in the cool night air. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of sage and pine. They moved slowly, a silent dance born of shared glances and hesitant smiles. No music played, only the rhythm of their breath, the creak of the wooden porch beneath their feet, and the soft sigh of the evening wind. For a moment, the past faded, replaced by the fragile promise of something new. And in that dance of shadows, she found herself letting go, trusting him, trusting herself, to finally live. The first light of dawn seeped through the cabin window, soft and golden. She awoke with a calm she hadn't known in years, a quiet strength rooted deep inside. Outside, the world was waking, birds singing, the scent of blooming wildflowers drifting in on the breeze. He was already up, tending the horses, his silhouette framed by the early morning light. She dressed slowly, every movement deliberate, savoring the feel of the cool air on her skin. As she stepped outside, he turned, their eyes meeting, a silent greeting full of shared history, pain, and hope. No words were needed. Together they faced the rising sun. The past remained a shadow, but the future was hers to write, and for the first time, she was ready to live.